everyone. Good evening. I am so excited that we are kicking off our Monday with such an amazing event. I could not be more excited about our guest this evening or the book that we are talking about. And I know so many of you are excited and have also been picking up this book over the weekend in preparation for tonight's event. So we're really glad that you're here. My name is Stephanie, and hopefully I'm a familiar face to you if you stop by the bookstore, but if not, I'm the Director of Operations at the Novel Neighbor, which is an independently owned and operated bookstore found in St. Louis, Missouri. And tonight we are hosting an amazing author, Alyssa Friedland, from Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, which hopefully this cover looks so familiar to many of you. I know I've seen it so many places. And as soon as I saw the cover, I knew I needed to read it. I was so excited to pick it up, and it did not disappoint. So before we get into what the Last Summer at the Golden Hotel is, I want to tell you a little bit about our author, just briefly before we bring her on. Alyssa Friedland is the acclaimed author of Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, The Floating Feldmans, which those in the Novel Neighbor Book Club will be particularly familiar with and can vouch for, The Intermission, and Love and Miscommunication. Alyssa is the graduate of Yale University and Columbia Law School and currently teaches novel writing at Yale. She lives with her husband and 3 children in New York City, what she considers the best place on earth. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Alyssa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm sorry that I said New York's the best place. I've been to St. Louis, actually, on my book tour. I went for my first book in 2015, and it is also a great city.
Thank you. I think we can understand that, I think some St. Louisans would fight for St. Louis being the best place. So, it's a proximity and, deep.
Yeah, you just love your home the most.
Yeah. And I do have to say, as a former East Coaster, I do love New York City, and it is a great city. So you're not that far off. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like I said, we've been so looking forward to this. I know a lot of people are definitely familiar with all of your works, but especially Floating Feldmans, because we did that for our book club. So people will be joining for that. So shout out to Novel Neighbor Book Club, people watching. But Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, your newest book, if people aren't familiar with it or they just picked it up but haven't gotten to open the pages, what is your pitch for what is this book? What does it mean to you?
So first, if you love Dirty Dancing and you love The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you will love Last Summer at the Golden Hotel. It is set in the Catskills at a resort very much like Kellerman's from Dirty Dancing, or the Steiner Resort from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, one of these grand Catskills resorts that was the height of fashion in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then, started a very slow decline in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts. And the Golden Hotel was once one of 500 hotels in the region, and all of them have closed except for the Golden. And it's really hanging on by a thread. And it is co-owned by 2 families. There are now 3 generations of both of these families. And a casino operator and developer makes a very tempting offer to the families to buy the hotel, which really means raise the buildings and put a casino up in its place, which did happen at the Concord Hotel, which was one of the real hotels in the Catskills, which is now Resorts World Casino. So a casino operator comes, and this forces 3 generations of the 2 families back to campus to decide the fate of their beloved Golden.
It's so funny. This will come back around full circle later, but I love that you mentioned Dirty Dancing and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and you'll see why. I was like, oh, wow, I'm glad that, but those were totally what I was picturing before I even I think I was the first chapter in the book, and I was like, okay, I already have this image in my head of what I'm getting into. And
I think that really helped people reading the book to be able to picture Kellerman's and to have a sense of what this kind of hotel, because obviously I describe it and I try my best to describe it, but when you have the reference point of Dirty Dancing, then you can, get there more easily and access the visual more easily. So that I'm very grateful. And also the book starts with a quote from Dirty Dancing on the epigraph page.
Well, and I also wanted to show, because what I love a book that gives me a family tree. And so you had mentioned the 2 different families, the Goldmans and the Weingolds. And I was again, just anything where I open the pages and there's a family tree then there's like, you give a great visual of the Golden Hotel before the prologue. And I was just like, this is everything I want. It's such a great, like.
I think that the family trees are really important because the book has a lot of characters. And so for people to like go back and reference, be like, whose grandchild was that again? Or who's who? So I'm really glad that they're there because the book is definitely like a multiple point of view. It was really important to me that everyone got their fair share and like they got to say how they felt about the hotel and that we understood what was going on in their personal lives and how that affected the decision of whether to vote to sell or to keep it. So there are a lot of characters. So I think that the family tree kind of saved a lot of people some confusion.
Yeah, it definitely was very helpful. I thought it was very helpful when I was first getting started. Like it was like, it just was a couple times, especially among the grandparents in like first line, like the grandchildren came in and it took me what I'm trying to say is it actually did not take me long. What I think you did so great in this book is like, it wasn't, even though there's so many characters at play, I felt like you teed us up for those characters and made them all so distinct that it was not hard to keep them separate once I found myself like getting oriented to the dynamic.
I'm really appreciative. I've gotten a lot of praise that the voices were really distinct. And a lot of people who interview me are like, how did you know what an 82-year-old man sounds like? How do you know what a 21-year-old, teenager sounds like? I'm like, I don't know. That's why I'm an author. Like maybe I'm wrong, but I try my best and I like to imagine it. And that's really fun for me is to write, to get into different heads and to go and write Louise, who's like the grand dame of the hotel. And she's, this fabulous, woman who would never leave the house without lipstick, and just that I could totally picture her. And I loved being in her head. And then like next chapter, like I'm in her daughter's head and her daughter's like totally more like schlumpy in comparison and doesn't care about that stuff. And I'm like, I feel like I'm conflicted. Like, do I care? Do I not care? So like I'm in a Louise chapter. I'm like, I do care what I look like. And I do want to get my hair done. And then I'm in an Amy chapter and I'm like, who cares? They'll just like me for who I am. And like, so it's like, I get to like, my multiple personality disorder, can be, I can satisfy it with my multiple point of view books. But I do like it. It's just really fun to have a big cast of characters. I also think when you have a wide cast of characters, it just gives readers more opportunities to connect with the narrator. Because if the entire book is told from the perspective of like a 28-year-old woman, who's, married, like then that is like, can be a little bit isolating to those who, can't identify with that point of view. But when you have a big cast of characters and you're representing like genders and sexualities and ages and stages of life, then like there's chances are that like no matter who picks up the book, there'll at least be one of the characters that they really feel like a connection to.
It's so funny that you said about Louise and Amy right away, because those two immediately came to my mind as well. Like I love all these characters. It's not even like they're my favorite ones, but their dynamic as mother-daughter and also as a reader of them. Like there were so many times that I was like, I love Louise. And then she like says something, like, this doesn't spoil anything, but like kind of the dynamic of like Louise's granddaughter, Amy's daughter, is like getting teed up for most of this to potentially get engaged to this guy. And like their approach to her getting married is like very different. Like Louise is like, we have to like gussy you up and like, yes. And of course this is what it would look like. And Amy's like, well, she doesn't need a man to complete her. And I was like, I agree with both of these.
I agree with both of them also. I'm like, I'm such a feminist. You don't need to get married. And then I look at my own kids. I'm like, I hope you get married. So I am like, I'm sure we all are sort of conflicted on the inside. And so we're all a little Louise and we're a little bit Amy. But I did this Instagram thing like a while ago, and I was just like, everyone who's read Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, like, who's your favorite character? And I had no idea like where it was going to go. And there were so many Amy's. Like, I didn't know how many people would connect with Amy. I was like, I like her, and I'm happy because I feel like she's the most like me, but like, oh,
people like me.
Like overwhelmingly the favorite. Like a few hundred people answered on Instagram, and it was like definitely Amy was the majority answer, which I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting. And it like doesn't surprise me, but also kind of does, of just that it was so universal. But I mean, I think she's a great character who I feel like was one of the first people that I had like strong feelings for based off of.
I mean, I think she's relatable and she's real. So I guess that helps. And maybe a lot of my readers are also kind of that sandwich generation where they have parents that they have to deal with and children that they have to deal with. And that's certainly Amy's situation. And so maybe there's just like an identification with her.
I could totally see that. Since we're on the line of talking about characters, backing up to big picture before, there are a couple I want to delve into, but when you were like mapping this out, did you automatically know all these characters and map out their distinct like personalities, or did some of that develop over the course of writing them?
I guess, the family tree, like to start at the top, like it was definitely going to be two couples. Like the grandparents said it was going to be two couples. I knew the men were going to be best friends. I knew that they were going to marry women who were very different from each other and that was going to be a bit of a conflict. And then it really worked for the story for Amy to be an only child for reasons that, will reveal themselves when you read the book. It really worked for the story. And so then I wanted her, as a reaction to being an only child, to have 3 kids of her own because she didn't like being an only child. So she probably would have more than 2. So she had 3 and I started figuring that out. And then, the other ones, the twins, like Amy was a girl already. So then I wanted the Weingolds to have, boys. And I liked the idea of them being twins and one, like a love triangle, and Amy's in love with one of them. The other one's in love with Amy. And it just worked. And, Brian doesn't have kids of his own and Peter does. And I don't know. I don't even know how I figure it all out. It works. I use a whiteboard and I draw the family out on a whiteboard, and then their personalities, some of them come really naturally and some of them I have to sit and I just sit. I don't really like outline, but I'll just sit there and be like, like who is Amy? Like, what is she into? And I just think like, what would work? What would work for the story? Like what would enhance the story? It's not like random, like, let me make her whatever, like really into knitting because I need to give her like a quality or like a hobby. Like if she's going to be really into knitting, it's because like it is good for the story. So I think a lot about like what character, so it's like she's very artistic, which like comes into play later, where she, has this beautiful painting that she made at the hotel. And like, that's why she, she's described as being artistic. And it's also a trait that her mother is like, can't figure out where that trait came from, which is also very relevant in the story. And so I think about things like that. So I sit around and I think like, what would make the character interesting and also help move the story forward and be relevant to the story.
I was just wondering that because I was like, there's so many of these, like, were they all so clear from the beginning, or did they have to like evolve in some way? And I'm sure it's both, like you and how you just.
Sometimes they evolve along the way and they have more developed personalities by like chapter 8 or 9. So then I have to go back and make sure that those traits, like if by, chapter 10, I figure out that a character is like a closet smoker and is like, needs to like hide smoking, for whatever reason. Then like, I have to remember and it's great for the story to be a closet smoker. Then I have to remember like to introduce that earlier, because I don't always know everything about the characters in the beginning. So then it's about their personalities develop, and then you have to read a book like a million times before it's ready to be published. So like reread, and every time improve. That's like kind of like you're so sick of the book by the end.
I'm sure. Like by the time you're on tour, you're probably like, I am so tired of talking about these.
I mean, it's weird being on tour because I'm also writing another book. So it's like, I love these characters. Like the Golden Hotel is my favorite book I've written by far. And I'm like kind of obsessed with it. So I really like it. But my day-to-day job now is like writing the other book. So, it's a little bit funky situation, to be like, I'm living in sort of 2 worlds right now.
Yeah. We'll circle back to that project at the end, maybe. So did you grow up going to the Catskills, or how did this Catskills? I don't know why I said it like I don't know. Sorry. I can't ever remember like what my accent is and what I'm allowed to say and like the actual name for some of these places. I always grew up calling it the Catskills.
So I I did go to the Catskills when I was a teenager for holidays with my family. And it was already on the decline. Like we stayed at one of these big resorts, very much like the Golden. And I don't think like I noticed that it wasn't really in good condition because I was a teenager and it's like not what you're thinking about. But my parents are like, oh yeah, like that was not a nice place. Like that was really falling apart. My mom has like such amazing memories of the Catskills because she really did go every summer of her life, of her childhood, from the time she was 4 until 22. She spent every single summer, an entire summer in the Catskills. And it's just like thinks it's the most magical place on earth. And is like, it was such a wonderful time. And she's sad that the region like kind of I wouldn't say it fell apart. It's just really different now. And it's not a place people would go for like, 12 weeks at a time. It's like we work differently now. I mean, now we all work remotely, or a lot of remote work, but like people don't really have jobs where they can like disconnect anymore for the entire summer, and more women work. Like, and by the time my mom went, she would go with her mom and her sister for the entire summer, and her father would just drive up on the weekends. Like he worked in the city and then he came on the weekends. Like that's just not the world we live in anymore.
No, that was like, if there's anything I was upset with you about, I was like, this made me want to go on vacation in the Catskills and I can't. Or like I could, but like it's not going to be like what I want it to be. And I was like, maybe you can single-handedly bring back a resurgence of the Catskills. Not to like put, anything major on you or anything, but
a lot of people like come after they read the book, I see in the reviews, are like, this made me want to take a trip to the Catskills immediately, which is so interesting because I'm like, I definitely feel like I represent the region in a positive way, but I also am very honest about like the condition of the hotel and that the Catskills aren't what they used to be. And yet for whatever reason, I think there's like a flavor that comes through of the Catskills. And that's what makes people want to be there, because people like, this is such a prevalent comment. Like, I love the book and I must get to the Catskills immediately, which I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's interesting.
I was like thinking about what was making me feel that way. And I wondered if it was because like Dirty Dancing and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel have always given me something that like has this really good impression of what it was. And I feel like I have a picture of like at the, at its peak, like what this meant to people, how cool it was to go there. And I was like, but I wonder if the difference, because I've never quite felt that way after watching them, but I wondered if it was because those are always set in a time period that I do not like.
Yeah,
versus like your book being set in the modern day, and if there was something there that was like connecting me to the material.
Yes, I think so. I think because you can picture, like my book is set in present day, so you can picture what it would be like to be in the Catskills now, not like in an era of the Maisel outfits and no cell phones and everything. I mean, this is very much like all my characters have computers and phones and or they're living modern lives and they're up there. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. This is like, you want to be there because you can picture it like in today's day. So yeah. Oh, I would love to bring back the Catskills. I think they are coming back a little bit. It's just in a different form. Like there are a bunch of like very hip hotels, not 500 like there used to be, but there is like resurgence, I would say.
Yeah, it made me want to check into on like the Poconos was where like everyone in our area went if you were like escaping for the weekend, but for weeks over the summer. It was, no one ever went for 12 consecutive weeks, but it was a place that I heard that I knew people who went multiple weeks of it, like maybe like a month or something.
It's similar. I mean, I definitely people reach out to me who aren't based in New York or like the Tri-State area, and they're like, I didn't go to the Catskills, but I'm from Wisconsin and we went to this place by the lake, or, it sounds very similar. And I'm from Pennsylvania and, we all went to the Poconos or we went to the Berkshires. Like I think the Catskills are the Catskills, and like the Borscht Belt era, like all these Jewish hotels that were this like cultural center, that was just the Catskills. It didn't exist elsewhere, but I think there were smaller like mini versions of it elsewhere.
Well, and so I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that was something I wanted to touch on too, of what makes it so unique, and something that I feel like you, I'm guessing by the nature of what you were like the nature of the source material of course, Jewish identity was going to be a big part of it. But you bring that out and have that play out in your characters in all the different ways that also seem to match up with the generations. And like, is that something that you knew specifically that you wanted to do and chose that for any reason, of like chose the Catskills outside of like that you went there and were familiar with it?
I was happy
that important to you in choosing it?
I was happy to educate readers about that part of history that they didn't know about. Like many people who have seen the movie Dirty Dancing, which is like basically everyone in the world, many people don't realize that that was a Jewish hotel, that was meant to be like a Borscht Belt, which is what the region was called. Like that was its nickname. They don't realize that because it's not explicit in Dirty Dancing. So it's a little bit of like inside baseball. Like if you know, you know. And if you're familiar with the Catskills and the Northeast Jewry and where they vacationed, you immediately knew that like Baby Hausman is Jewish and Dr. Hausman is Jewish and everyone at this hotel is Jewish, you know, the guests and most of the waiters, not, you know, Patrick Swayze's character, obviously, you know, we don't dance that well, but generally, like, you just know, like, I know. And my friends from college who aren't Jewish, and I told them, like, well, Dirty Dancing, that's like Kellerman's a hotel that like 100% of the guests were Jewish. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? And they had no idea. And I think like nowadays, if the movie was made, it would be explicit because like we're so much more, I don't know, like honest about cultural origins. And it's like, I think there's less of a worry about like turning off people that something can have like mainstream appeal because there's more interest in like different cultures. I think I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I think. And I think for me writing this book, it felt really good that people didn't know. And so many of my readers are not Jewish. Like most of my readers aren't Jewish. Like it's, you know, we're a small portion of like the country. And, you know, I was book of the month. So like I reached a really wide demographic. And I read a lot of the comments and people are like, it was so interesting. I did not know anything. I'm not Jewish. I didn't know anything about Jewish history. I had no idea that this existed. It was really interesting. It made me go on Google and read more. And I don't know. I don't write historical fiction. Like, again, this is a modern story, but I generally feel that like when I read a book, if it makes me then want to go to the computer and Google and look stuff up, that's a good sign. That's like, I'm in it. I don't want to leave it. I want to know more. And so many people are like really encouraged to learn more. And I also, there's also a big concept of like, you know, the Jewish representation in the book.
Yeah.
Which I've gotten a lot of praise for. Like I would say generally like people were very satisfied with the Jewish representation in the book. But to be honest, like, thank God I didn't think about that when I was writing it. I just wrote the story as it came to me. And I never thought like, oh, I have to worry. Like this is Jewish representation and am I doing it right? Because it would have been nice if I thought of it because then maybe I would like have had extra sensitivity, but I also think it might've been inhibiting to me to like feel that oh my God, I'm representing an ethnic group and a culture and a religion. And am I misstating things or am I creating stereotypes? Am I, you know, debunking stereotypes I feel like I would have like overanalyzed every line of dialogue. I just wrote, these are just people. Like I just wrote two families who happen to be Jewish and I didn't stress about it. And like the fact that they're Jewish, like really comes through in who they are, but I didn't like agonize, you know, about stereotyping. And luckily it worked out because the response has been great and people really like the Jewish representation in the book, which I'm happy to say is like a happy accident of having a relaxed attitude about it and just writing the story that I wanted to tell. And luckily, like
that you love,
it came through, you know, in a positive way.
Yeah. I was trying to sit here and think, and I probably couldn't find the page off the top of my head, but I know you'll know what I'm talking about. So like, I did not know from Dirty Dancing when I was watching it, that I had no idea about Jewish culture or the Borscht Belt. And I feel like I've learned a lot of that from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, because obviously her identity is at the forefront in that show. And like that connected the dots a lot quicker for me. Like, and it's more obvious because they've chosen to tell that story in that way of, you know, say what you were just talking about. But there was still a part in here that I was like, I just remember reading it. It's not even a large paragraph of, I was like, I didn't know that. And it's like the 3 A's of why it declined. And what are the 3 A's again?
So the historians will say that the reason that the Catskills declined and the Borscht Belt declined are because of the 3 A's, which are air conditioning. Air conditioning was much more accessible and became available in the city. And so you didn't have like a need to, escape, as everyone started to have more than just like one window unit in their apartment, and had like central air, and people were, able to cool off in the summertime. Air travel, which is huge. And air travel became, significantly more affordable as time wore on. So you could go from like, New York to Paris for not that much money. And then you're like, well, I could see the world, or I could just return to the Catskills every summer. And so they're like, people have wanderlust and they wanted to, explore the world. And so the affordability of airfare was huge. And then finally, the 3rd A is assimilation. It's actually, for sure, Jews are more assimilated now than they were, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And more than that, like they're accepted, the Catskills, many of the hotels in the area actually didn't allow Jews in the beginning, and they would have signs that said Gentiles only. And so as a result, hotels sprung up to accommodate Jews. And so then it became like a kind of, self-segregating, but not necessarily by choice, like Jews weren't there. I think there was like there was like a desire to be together, and the hotels, many of them were kosher, and you celebrated the holidays together and Shabbat. But there was also like a reality of not being welcome in other hotels. And so as Jews like intermarried more and just assimilated in general, and were less like, fresh off the boat from Europe, but became more American, they vacationed less as like a cohesive group, I would say.
Okay. It was just such an interesting part to me of like, I just learned something. And the same way that you just said, like, you're not writing historical fiction. This is a contemporary novel, but I still feel like at the same time that I'm getting this amazing family, 2 different families, getting to know all these characters, figuring out if they're going to sell or not sell the hotel, and like, what is the fate of all of this going to be? I felt like I was still learning something, which is always what I want. Like, I call it like, it's like fun fiction, but like with depth.
Yeah, I like that too. I love to learn, and like as I'm reading, I don't read nonfiction very often. So I'm basically escaping into a novel when I read, but you can also learn a lot from novels. Like it doesn't, I'm not reading like sci-fi alternate universe stuff, like if you read a novel, like you can learn a lot about even like a novel that's set in a town I've never been to, or a novel about a culture I know nothing about. It might be a made up story, but like if the author has done their homework, you're still going to learn a lot that you can count on as truthful information. And my book, like, I do feel like I would have heard if I had a lot of mistakes, and
that's true. I think you
wouldn't cry about that. So, it's a faithful representation of the Catskills because I really did my homework.
Did you ever visit the Catskills while you were doing homework for this?
I did it. It was great. I went, when I first started writing, even though I had been there as a teenager, my memories were scattered. I wanted to just almost feel the air. Like I wanted to see the foliage. I wanted to feel the air. I wanted to get the vibe. And Catskills is like a lot more hipster now than it was back in like the Dirty Dancing era. So I was able to see that. Like I was able to go, and I went to Scribner's Catskill Lodge, which is like a thriving hotel in the region now, but it's nothing like, Kellerman's or the Steiner or the Golden. It's like all people from like Brooklyn with tattoos that are like really cool and have like cool sweaters, and their kids dress really well. And like, they're hip. Like that's the vibe there now. And there was a lot for me to glean. Like I took a ton of pictures. That was really helpful, especially because like Zach and Phoebe and my grandchildren generation in the book are like all about making it into like a hipster paradise. And there's a hotel also called the Roxbury now that is very hipster, like Instagram ready, and Scribner's has like a really active Instagram account. Like it's so photogenic and so ready for like TikTok videos and Instagram photos. It's perfect for that in a way that like obviously these Borscht Belt hotels were not concerned with like, do we have a good backdrop for Instagram photos, And then, so of course, it was like getting the topography right, getting like the way the air feels right, and then also seeing like the hip vibe. And I didn't really ever get to see the region because like these hotels that are springing up now that are like the cool hotels they're like a good 30, 40 minutes away from the part of the Catskills where these hotels were. But I have this book, which I'll show. This was a really helpful book for my work. It's a photojournalist. Her name is Marissa Scheinfeld. And she grew up in the Catskills. Her father worked in the hotels. And she went and she photographed what the hotels look like now. Like they've not even been cleared away. So like, like that's standing there now.
Just like, wow.
Just dilapidated. Yeah, I know. I should be. Oh yeah, here. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, like that's still there.
Shells of.
Yeah, just rubble. There's like swimming pools that are just empty and full of debris and branches and chairs where all the upholstery has been ripped apart by animals and they're just flopped over. I mean, there were 500 hotels and 500 bungalow colonies in the region. And now there are none. And like some of them have been redeveloped. Like I said, the Concord is now a casino. Kutcher's, which is the hotel my parents took us to, is a yoga resort now called Y1. It's a wellness retreat. Okay. Those are places that were demolished and buildings were put up in its place. But so many of these they're just carcasses. And she went and she photographed it. And she did, it's more than pictures in the book. She does like a very thorough explanation. And it's a really amazing book. And I found that very helpful for my research.
It almost reminds me, just briefly from what you showed, of it's just on my mind because of it just happening, but like what happens to the Olympic parks when they're like with the swimming pools filled with things and just like this infrastructure is still in place that like nobody's maintaining or doing anything with.
I felt like I saw that. I went to Barcelona like after they had the Olympics and I was like just like, oh, that was our Olympic village, but it was like now it's just a ghost town,
it's not even
like, it was thriving and now it's just empty. Yeah. So kind of like that. Yeah. That's a good point.
To briefly go back to some characters, I did have a question on that of, was there ever a time that you had like, you got to a point with a character that, you weren't sure that you liked them or like you were having a hard time liking them in that moment or something? Was there ever a character that you like really struggled with?
I mean, there's one like sort of obvious villain in the book. So I never liked him, but even him, I sort of like try to humanize. There are no chapters from his point of view. You never get in his head, which is deliberate. I don't want to be in that head. He's Amy's husband, who, for those who have not read the book yet, he's Amy's husband who ends up, he's a doctor and he gets caught up with the pharmaceutical company that sells OxyContin. And he ends up like basically running a pill mill. But even with him, as much as like, I think it's terrible what he did, I've done so much research on Purdue Pharmaceuticals and oxycodone and all that. And because I just find it really interesting. It all started from like reading a New Yorker article about it like 8 years ago on an airplane that I couldn't put down. I remember it was one of those like 16-page New Yorker articles where I was like, I'll read 2 pages and I'll get the like gestalt and that's enough. That's what I usually do with the New Yorker. This one, I was like, I just couldn't stop. And then I watched documentaries on it and it was like, actually like kind of understand how some of these doctors like do get caught up and they're like sold a bill of goods from the pharmaceutical companies. They're really helping people and that the slow release pill, can't be crushed up and snorted or this or that. And like, and then they give them like such massive incentives for prescribing that you're like, you're helping people who have chronic pain and you're giving them a new lease on life. And here's a new Mercedes while you're at it, And so I think it's like anyone who's not maybe totally a bad person inside, but like it's a slippery slope of like graft and greed and like that that was where he comes from, which is why I think Amy is like, he's not a, like he didn't go and like take a girl off the street and like chop her up, with an axe and put her in his trunk. Like, it's not like she found out her husband was like, had like bodies in his freezer, It's more nuanced. And so I think that's why she's not like immediately like, get out, I never want to see you again. Like, we're done. Like, they had a 30-year marriage together. Like, it's hard to flush that down the toilet, So he's like, he's harder to like, but like, as far as I liked them all. I really liked them all. I mean, I guess probably Louise a little bit like annoys me because I don't like total vanity, and because she has a lot of vanity. But that's also that generation. Like, that is a generation that many women really don't believe you should like go out and walk around in Lululemon and like in your sagging like sweatpants, and like are kind of horrified about the way people dress now. And I'm really, really casual, but I sometimes am really embarrassed when I run into people and I'm like, of course, like I have seen my ex-boyfriend in the supermarket, like when I like have, like my glasses and my worst fitting sweatpants on. I'm like, maybe that generation's not wrong. That like, you should always have clean underwear if you end up in the hospital, and like you should always have lipstick on. You never know who you're going to run into, but 99% of the time you're not going to run into anyone, and I'd rather be comfortable. So that kind of Louise like sort of annoyed me. And because I've like, while I do feel like you don't need a man to complete you, and like, I'm more Amy than I am Louise. Like, I'm very much a career woman, and I work really, really hard, and I don't have like a antiquated, view of marriage. Like, my husband and I are 50-50 partners, and we share the child rearing, and we both work really, really hard and equally hard. And so like Louise is more like old school notions of marriage. I guess I had a little bit of a harder time with her, but she's a product of her generation.
Yeah, and I think that shows through of like, even if she's a little bit difficult, I feel like you wrote her in a way that I think it's very easy for us to connect with her and empathize and like be very clear on like, she is a product of her generation, and like there's still some redeeming qualities about her. I feel like I like her, but I would like her a lot less if she was actually my mother.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, she's a great character, and I feel like I like really love her, and I really love picturing some of these scenes and like how hilarious she must be, and like
fabulous aunt. Yeah, like she's good if she's your fabulous aunt.
Oh yes, that's a great way to talk about her. Yes, I'm like, yeah, I would love if I was in her sphere, in her orbit.
She wants Amy to look a certain way, and she wants her granddaughter to look a certain way, and she has opinions, and she shares her opinions, and I think we all know women like that. And we know there's, strong personalities.
Yes, they're both strong, great personalities. The character I think that surprised me the most that I ended up like really loving, which I think probably won't surprise you, but just like when I was first introduced to him, I didn't realize I'd like fall in love with him so much, is Zach.
Oh yeah. Everyone loves Zach.
He's great. He's so great. He really has a great like story arc.
For people who read the Floating Feldmans, he's like Freddie. He's like the unsung hero, the dark horse, and he's, kind of, people are ready to write him off, but in fact he has a lot to offer.
So speaking of the Floating Feldmans, something that I immediately, when I like was reading, just even before I opened this, just reading the back of it and finding out the plot for this book, I was like, oh, I love this. We're getting another like great family story. And the Floating Feldmans, like they're on vacation. It's a family on vacation, right? Versus like, they're again, very different stories. But is there something that you're drawn to of like discussing family dynamics? Is that, or is it just so happen that those are both prominent themes in your two recent books?
I think I'm really drawn to writing about families because there's like infinite material. Like I think you could write like 100 family stories and never run out of something to say. Because there's like more than like a marriage, just like a husband and a wife or whatever, 2 men, 2 women, like it's just 2 people. They're like the family. There's the in-laws, there's the kids, there's the cousins, there's the step family. Like there's so many layers. And like, I know the other day, my husband and I were in bed and we were like, we're just so grateful for like our nuclear family. Cause at the end of the day, we sort of hate everyone. And we're like, at least we have each other to like, we can just We're like, the best part about being married is that we can like lie in bed and talk about how awful everyone else is in the family, and we're like, we don't really mean it, of course, and we're very close with our extended family, but there is like, there's always like drama of some sort, like whose family doesn't have drama? There's also something nice about writing about family drama because it makes people feel less alone, because they're like, oh, I have like so much trauma, and people have come over to me, like when I went on, more like when I was doing tour like in person with the Floating Feldmans. I have people came over to me and they were like, I have a really terrible relationship with my daughter-in-law, or I haven't spoken to my brother in 20 years and it made me want to call him, or like it made me feel better that there are like other messed up families out there. And it's like, yeah, there are. Of course there are. And it's nice to like validate those feelings in a book, because like, obviously it's fictional, but I write very realistic fiction. Like this is not, this is not some sci-fi escapist, like it's super realistic. And, so while the people are fictional, I think the fact that like people are like, is this your family? It's because it feels really real. So they know that there's enough like grains of truth and like enough drawn from real life, be it my family or my friends' families, just stories I've heard throughout my life. Like they know that it's fiction, but that they don't need to feel alone if it echoes their own life.
Well, and I think that's something that's so great about like the number of dynamics that are in this book that are like, again, it's not hard to keep track of anything. It's you very easily get the lay of the land of who and what all these different relationships are. But it's like, because there's so many of them, I feel like it's really hard for somebody to not find at least one of those relationships that they're like, oh, that's the dynamic in our family between like,
the siblings or the mother-daughter or the spouses, totally, or the grandchild. Yes, I think so, because it's more than just finding like a character you identify with, but it's also finding a relationship that you identify with.
And it also doesn't hurt that, of course, there's like, it's not the prominent storyline, but there's also like a love story that you definitely get invested in and are rooting for throughout the whole thing. Where I'm like, yeah. That also kept me reading of like, I want to see like what happens, because it was very clearly staged. Well, and really, I guess like multiple ones, but there's one I got.
There's a main love story, but there's some, other potential.
Whimsical, like who likes who and what are the different, who's swooning over each other. So getting away from the characters of the book a little bit, because you teach novel writing, like we said in your intro. So I want to ask you a couple questions about your writing process. And I want to say to everyone who's watching, feel free to drop questions in. We want to make sure, like I have tons of questions and questions we've gotten from people at the store, but if you have questions that have come up during this conversation, please drop them in the comments. We will make sure that they get asked because we'd love to hear what you have questions about. So for your writing process, do you write linearly or do you write certain scenes and then connect them, if that makes sense?
Linear. My brain, that's just the way I work. It's just in order. Chapter 1, chapter 2. I'm always very impressed with people who can do like, I'm going to write the mall scene today, and tomorrow I'm going to write the prom scene. And then I'm like, I can't, like, I got to write Monday, and then I got to write Tuesday, and then I have to write Wednesday. I'm just linear. I'm a linear thinker.
Do you have advice for like, what do you tell your students when they get like stuck writing? Like, do you ever say to like move on to a certain point of the story? I guess is what I'm saying, of like when you get stuck, not talking about like writer's block necessarily, but like if you're just like, I don't know where to get to take this from here.
I'm linear, you may not be, and so just because like I don't outline and just because I don't do like piecemeal scenes, there are unbelievable writers better than me who are huge outliners, or they write like, if you have multiple point of view, they write all the chapters from one person's point of view and then all from the other, and then they, intersperse them, or there are like a million ways to skin a cat. So it's like, figure out sort of who you are as a writer is probably the thing I say on my first day of class to my students. Like, not on day one, but if you have a goal for the semester, like if you have one goal for the semester, figure out, are you someone who's like better at free writing or does better with an outline? because I think you'll naturally be able to tell which one is better for you. And for me, outlines are really suffocating. They inhibit my creativity. So much of like what I think is strong in my books are the like lines of dialogue and the small moments that are humorous. And those don't ever come up in an outline because they're not like these massive plot points. But then if you're writing like a thriller, it's all about the plot and what's how, you know, and the twists and the turns, and those that lends itself well to an outline. And so I think it's like figuring out who you are. And then of course, like in terms of getting stuck, I think it's really important to like never let perfection be the enemy of good. And just, you know, there's no sentence that's worth a day. Like you can go back to it, like move on, like write a sentence. There's definitely like, as I'm trying to like make progress in a book, I'm like, yeah, this is like kind of crappy. Like this paragraph is like kind of crappy, but I got to move on and then I will revise it, you know, so just go, go, go. Like, unless you want to take 10 years and write a book, and some people do that and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm a really commercial writer. So like for me, it's like important to put out a book a year or a book every 2 years. Like there's many people who are fine putting out like a book every 10, you know? And so they maybe are going to obsess over that, like one line of dialogue, and that's okay. It's just what you want for your career.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see why you would be a great teacher. Yep. Even as somebody who's not a writer, I'm like, oh,
I really love my students. They are amazing. And I stay really close with them. I've taught for 2 years now, and I have like some students that have really stayed in touch, and we talk all the time and we Zoom, and they're very great. And many of them will be great novelists one day. I have no doubt, if they want to be.
Yeah. Did you always want to be a novelist?
I did from the time I was 7. I was like writing. I don't know, novelist, but I certainly knew I wanted to be a writer, like maybe a journalist or write for magazines. Like the theme of my bat mitzvah was magazines, because I was like, I want to work at like Vogue or whatever. Like I wasn't even into fashion. I just thought it was cool. Or like New York Magazine. I remember like I ended up interning there and I thought it was like the coolest thing. Yeah, from the time I was little, I liked creative writing a lot in class, and I would like make my friends play like book with me when they'd come over to my house to play. Like the activity was sometimes like, here's a stack of like white computer paper and we're going to write a story. I'm sure they were like, that's so boring, but we couldn't like see my Barbies until we like at least wrote a book, you know? So we'd write like a chapter book and write a little story and staple it together and sometimes illustrate it. And then when they did that, then I was like, okay, now you can see my Barbies.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. That would, I think, yeah, I would have had a hard time if I was your Barbies was like my primary everything.
Yeah,
so
I had like an amazing collection of Barbies because I had this problem growing up with my teeth. Like I never lost any teeth naturally. I had to have all my teeth pulled, which is crazy. But I had like all my teeth, my adult teeth would come in behind my baby teeth before my baby teeth were ready to fall out. And it was really bad in my mouth and getting really crowded. So I had every single tooth extracted, but every tooth I got a Barbie. And that's like 20 teeth. Okay. So I had like, and I get like a fancy, like a good one, you know, because
yeah,
it's not really bad for me. Like I never got like tooth. I guess that was my tooth fairy. Like, but I never lost a tooth. Like a kid is supposed to lose a tooth, you know, and I never lost a tooth except for like one time, like this kid hit me in gym and he knocked one of my teeth out. But other than that, which was worse, you know, other than that, oh, and then I couldn't find the tooth in the gym. Like I made everyone search on the floor and we couldn't find the tooth. And that was like horrible. And then every other one was extracted by the dentist. But the upshot is that I had like the best Barbies of like the whole community.
That is so funny that you mentioned that though, because I am the third child in my family. And therefore, like there was always, and I'm the third child by a lot. Like 13 years is my next sibling.
Wow.
And so I feel like there's always a thing where like everyone did the facade, but it was like the second that I was like, Santa's not real, is he? It was like, yeah, great, glad you figured that. You know, like there was never like prolonging or like keeping it on. And so as soon as I was like, the tooth fairy's not real, my mom was like, yeah, great. Do you want to go pick out a Barbie? Like I literally would come out and like I remember there was like a week where I lost, like, I know. Every single day, and she was like, great, let's go to the store. Like you can pick out like an accessory or something, you know. Like,
for my oldest, I was doing tooth fairy until he was probably like 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And the little one, my third, I was like so happy when like the charade was up so early because now I don't have to stay up anymore. And like, I would forget and stress and this. So I'm like, yeah, the jig is up and totally like that's just how it is for youngest kids.
It's great. I actually think it was great because people are just trying to be more real with you. And then they're also like, sure, you can pick out whatever you want. Great.
Yeah.
It was,
There's probably less magic though, and we were more focused on like some things. I'm like, we always made sure that like we took our oldest to go apple picking in fall, and then we're like, yeah, we don't like apple picking.
That's actually fun. We're not doing
here's like King Cullen. We're going to the supermarket. Here's your apple.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and we always don't get. I'm sure. Well, maybe you did a better job. Like you could see the progression through the baby books of like there's just like I got like one day. Like
I don't remember a single thing. He was like, "What's my first word?" I'm like, "Mama."
You're like, I don't remember at all.
I don't remember when he walked. I don't remember when he crawled. But I mean, he's like the cutest, It's not
Third kid love is real. It's great. Yeah. We're doing just fine. We've been made.
I married a third child, and I think he's like very well adjusted and very beloved.
Are you? What birth order are you? Totally random.
I'm second, so I don't know. Really, I don't know what that means. Like there was no third; it's just the second, and big age difference.
It's not like you were the middle child.
I was very much like an only child, I would say.
Okay.
A huge age, like not 13 years, but I had a very big age difference with my brother, so I'm sort of an only, which is fine. I certainly like a lot of attention. So
yes. Okay, sorry to go back to the book and you as a writer. Sidebar there. I hope everyone enjoyed. Do you have like a writing community? I mean, you mentioned that you stay in touch with your students. Do you also have like kind of mentors of your own, or like people that you're working, not like writing collaboratively with, can't say the word, collaborating with, but like writing alongside of, or like kind of like holding each other accountable? Is that something that you participate in at all?
I have a bunch of writer friends. Some of them are good for like motivation. You're just like, how are the edits going? Like, all right, I'm trying to get 10 pages done today. I'm trying to get, 5 pages done today, and kind of just someone to like complain to. But more, it's like, I would say I more have writers just for like, it's a common bond, so less about like, because we're not always on the same schedule. Like, if your book is not due the same month, or you're not publishing like on the same cycle, then we're not really like, it's hard to keep each other accountable because we're on such different schedules. It's more like talking about the industry and sharing tips and talking about social media for authors and supporting each other and figuring out like when a new book comes out, like what can we do to help our friends who are authors? Like we, definitely like when this book came out on publication day, I remember just like going on Instagram and just being like, my heart, I was so touched. I was like, I didn't even realize I had that many author friends, but the number of author friends that like posted about last summer at the Golden Hotel, like kind of astounded me. And it's not where it was more, I knew I had a community, but they came out really strong for this book. Not because I think this book is like better. It's just that I think that over time, over 4 books, like I've developed closer friendships. And so I have like a really great network of friends. I don't know them all in person. Like some of these relationships like exist purely online because the authors are based elsewhere. But like we Instagram message all the time and text, and it's really nice. And then of course, because I live in New York, there are a lot of writers. Yeah. So there are plenty that I do see in person, which is great.
I do distinctly remember, I'm trying to think of like, if I can remember anyone in particular, but I feel like I remember seeing on Pub Day and being like, that's really awesome. There, like, I remember seeing a bunch of writers that, authors that I knew or familiar with. Was one of them, why am I blanking on her name? The person who wrote Blush. I don't know why I'm blanking.
Oh yeah, Jamie Brenner.
I think she did, didn't she?
Friends, I love her.
Yeah, I thought like it was just, I remembered seeing different authors like that. So that's really cool. I think
she's an in real life friend. I saw her. She's the last author I saw before lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
We went to author Brenda Janowitz's book event at Barnes & Noble on the Upper East Side. I think it was the Upper East. And we were like, oh my God, what's happening in the world? Blah, blah, blah. And then like a week later or a day later, like it was like, goodbye, see you in a year. It's crazy.
Yeah, and speaking of her, Blush came out earlier this summer. Great book. People could
love that book.
Yeah, another great summer vibe with like set in a winery with lots of like family dynamics also at play. So that also kind of makes sense that you guys would be friends. Um, for you yourself personally in writing, do you have to create like a certain mood? Do you listen to music, or like what is your like, you're working on your next novel right now. Like what does that daily life look like for you?
I don't know music, no TV on in the background, but I don't need like quiet either. Like I can write in my kitchen with my kids around, and I can write with my phone. Like I also have my phone, like that doesn't bother me. Like the dinging of the text, if anything, it like keeps me sort of like from getting tired, and like it keeps me alert and sharp. So I have no problem with distractions, like to a point, So I like to go to my office and work and have like some quiet, but then there are times I like sit in my office and I decide like it's too quiet, and I open up the door just so I can hear some, background noise, which helps like keep me stimulated. So there's no like precious routine, which is good because I don't think I'd ever be able to like replicate it on a consistent basis. So I'm fortunate that like I don't need a certain mood or setting to write, because like as a mom of 3, like I'm sure that would be impossible.
How old are your kids?
I have 13, 11, and 8.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's fun. Those are also fun ages. I'm sure right now.
Yeah, those kids.
But yeah, that would definitely be hard to replicate. I was thinking they were on the younger side of like, it's not like you have 3 full-fledged adults that.
No. But they're not babies either, which is great.
Yeah.
They're home now, and they're just like doing their own thing. So
they can entertain themselves to a certain extent.
Yeah, they can totally. So it's real. I'm so happy to be done with the babiness.
I imagine that after 3, you're probably like, yeah, I'm ready for the next stages of things.
Yes, for sure.
So last question before we move into like some quick rapid fire ones that we like to always end with, but was there anything that was ultimately edited out of the book that you still think about?
No, I wouldn't say that. I feel like everything I was attached to made it in. So.
Oh, good. That's awesome. Was the editing process like, it's always difficult, right? But was it just like, what was the editing process for this like?
It was like reordering some of the chapters, I would say. Opening, like originally the first chapter was Amy, and then we decided, my editor was like, I think we should open with Brian in the hotel, and that would make more sense because we're like, we want to anchor the reader at the hotel and what's happening with the sale. So like, all right, that makes sense. It's like annoying because it's not just like edit, copy, edit, paste. There's like the introduction of characters, and then things don't make sense and whatever, but it was definitely the right decision. So, but I would say like some reordering. That's really it. But yeah, it's never fun. That's the worst part.
Yes, I've heard that's a consistent thing that we hear from authors, is that at the end of the day, you're usually like happy with the edits and excited about the final product, but it was never fun.
Hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never fun. I hate that part.
I think Emily Henry has been pretty vocal about that part too on like Instagram. But okay, so I made some themed like this or that questions, and then a couple of quick rapid fire questions. So that this or that, the reason I laughed is that literally one of them was Dirty Dancing or Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And so when you said both those things in the first like 2 minutes, I was like, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So which would you choose out of those 2?
Maisel.
Okay. That makes sense. It is pretty magical. I love that.
She's so funny, and I love funny women.
Oh my gosh. Her whole arc is...
And there's just more of them. Like, I love Dirty Dancing, but in 2 hours it's over. There's more Maisel.
Yes, that's actually a fair point. You get to do it like your story time is done with them. You only get 1 summer with them. You get like a couple of years at least. Exactly. Okay, so offline or having Wi-Fi on vacation?
Wi-Fi. That's jail to me to not have a phone and not be able to connect. It's my favorite thing in the world.
You'd be scaling it just like, was it Phoebe who scaled to get to the top?
To get her Wi-Fi. That would be me. Like feel like I walk into someone's house and I'm like, oh, what's your Wi-Fi password? Like before I give them a hug. Like I'm very connected to my phone. I'm just really attached to my friends, and I love texting with my friends. And so it's like a week of like not texting my friends would kind of kill me.
It would like take away some of your community, which
I'm just really chatty and really communicative with my friends. So
are you tennis or golf?
Golf.
I love that answer. I'm also a golfer. I love that.
Yeah, I really love to play golf. I don't get to play enough, but I love it.
That's awesome. Well, and especially we need more women in golf. Just if anyone's watching and was considering, should you try? Yes, we need more women in golf. This was also in terms of activities, dance classes or bingo. Obviously, was inspired by
dance. I dance a lot. I do dance workouts.
Oh my gosh,
I dance all the time, and my kids are like make fun of me because they walk by, and because I do it on the computer, like I do a virtual class, and they're like, "Mommy's dancing again." And they like make fun of my moves, but you would
really enjoy like going to a place like Dirty Dancing where like dance was part of the like summer experience.
I mean, I don't think I'd be very good at like ballroom dancing, but
I mean, who is really?
Like hip hop, I love.
That's awesome. That's so cool. That could be a fun, like, updated thing for them to do. Now, just in case anyone's listening again from the Catskills and how you can update to be. And the final list of that was like mountains or ocean.
Oh, I think ocean. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really love either. I like a nice, clean swimming pool. I'm not a huge beach person. I actually find like the sand really annoying, but I'm also not a big mountain person because I don't like to climb. I don't like to ski. So if I had to like pick, I'd rather
take me to a place that has a pool that overlooks the ocean.
Yeah. Like I want to look at the ocean, like with my drink, but like not have to get sandy.
And the security. Yeah. No, that actually hits for
me.
I'd
rather go to the Caribbean than go to like a mountain resort.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Okay. And last two questions. One of these, it's kind of random, but have you ever met a famous person, or who is the most famous person that you've met, if you have?
George President Bush was the most famous person I met.
Oh my gosh.
He was really nice. I got a picture with him. So I can't get more famous than the president, right? So
it does feel like it's a certain kind of celebrity status.
I met him when I was in college.
Okay.
He was really, really nice and friendly. And whatever your politics aside, he was like a true gentleman and really kind and warm. So definitely the most famous person I met.
Was Laura there, or was it just George?
Yeah, I've met Laura too.
Oh, that's cool.
Also, I mean, I would have said her, but she's not as famous.
Right,
really warm, lovely, lovely, lovely person. I mean, I don't know them well.
Yes, just a brief encounter. And what are you reading now?
Oh, I'm reading this fabulous memoir. So I don't typically read nonfiction, but I'm in love with this book by Bess Kalb called No One Will Tell You This But Me. You know it?
Yes, I do. I do know that.
It's so good. A friend recommended it to me like 4 years ago, and I have no idea why I didn't read it until now. But I was like, I need something that I know is going to be great. She swears by it, and it's so good.
Oh, I love that. That is a great press for anyone who is like looking for a backlist title.
Yeah.
That's such a great.
It's fabulous. And she's really a great writer, and it's funny and it's real. I love it.
Well, and before we end our time with you, I know sometimes you can't actually answer anything, but is there anything that you can tease us or tell us about what you're currently working on?
Sure. So my next book is called Most Likely. It comes out September of next year, September 2022.
Okay.
And it's a departure from family. It focuses on friendship, and it's about 4 women who reunite at their 25th high school reunion and face their high school superlatives. And life has not gone according to plan the way they thought it would. And they set out to make changes in their lives, and it's not so easy.
Oh my gosh, that sounds, I'm already ready. This is terrible. I wish we weren't having to wait till next September, but I love when we get a good tease that already is like captivating. So I can't wait.
I'm glad. I hope I'm still working on it. It's almost done. Like the first draft is basically like a month away from done, and then edits, and then reading it 100 million times, designing the cover, but it's getting there. It's slow, but we're getting there.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I want to remind everyone who's watching that you can purchase your copy of Last Summer at the Golden Hotel from us. And we do have signed book plates from Alyssa. And she is actually also sending us, do you want to show them what you're sending us really quickly?
Yeah, I have these retro viewfinders, and they say the Golden Hotel. They're these retro keychain viewfinders. And when you look inside, it's the book cover. And I'm going to send them to Novel Neighbor.
Yeah, so we're getting them. So if you purchase from us, which I'll throw the link up here just really quickly at the end, if you purchase from us, you can have all of those things and also come in and have a great conversation with us about this book, because I would love to talk to anyone else who's read it, as people this weekend will tell you. But Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This again was the perfect way to start our week. I've been looking forward to this for a while, because we've had this plan for a couple months. So I've definitely been looking forward to this, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. I had some fun chatting.
Yeah. Good night, everyone. Thanks for being with us.